My name is Ora Viola Williams Boykin, and I did attend Sunset Gap School for 7 years, plus kindergarten. And I'd have to figure out the years, but they started when I was 5 years old, and I left when I was 16.
Hello, I'm Earl Bryant. I'm the relative of Betty Williams. We were raised on Ings Creek. When she married, she moved to the Sunset Gap area. Her husband's name was David, and we were good friends his whole life. And me and Betty has been friends. We are second cousins.
Hi, this is Dan Davis, the son of Bob and Kay Davis. I had the fortunate opportunity to grow up at Sunset Gap in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Hello, my name is Elijah Gloffenheim. I am the great-great-grandson of Betty Jane Hicks Williams and the grandson of Betty Williams.
Hello, please allow me to introduce myself to you. My name is Kieran Williams Gloffenheim, and I want to share a little bit with you today about our family's history with the Sunset Gap Community Center. Betty Jane Hicks Williams was my great-grandmother, and she is the first landowner in Sevier County to donate land for the Sunset Gap Community Center to be built. So we'll hear a little bit more about Miss Betty Jane later on in the video.
Hi, my name is Becky Davis Sloan, and I am the middle daughter of Bob and Kay Davis, who are the co-directors at Sunset Gap Community Center from around 1965 until 1992.
I'm Betty Williams. I worked at Sunset Gap from 1965 to 2022, and I would have still been working except I fell and broke my leg, and so I just sort of retired since then.
Hey, my name is Duran Williams. I was born on January 24th, 1961. It come a big snow, Mom and Daddy said, and Daddy couldn't get us home from the hospital, so he sent Uncle Pete, his brother, to get us, and they brought us over to where Ben McGath's old store was, just that little house right up there, I think, where Aunt Tootie and Uncle Warnie lived, and we stayed there a night, and the next day Daddy could get us out and take us home, and it's a mile past Sunset Gap down in Sevier County called Boomertown. It's right there where Boomertown ends and Wilhite kind of begins, and that's where I spent my first few years.
Hi, my name's Tyler Williams. I grew up around the Sunset Gap Community Center. My family, the Williamses, of course, were integral in giving the land for the Sunset Gap Community Center. My grandparents, David and Betty Williams. Betty, of course, ran the thrift shop there for a number of years, cooked for work camp groups. My dad is her oldest son, Duran, who also grew up around the community center, just like I did. My mother's Melissa. Melissa taught preschool there for a number of years. She started out as the assistant preschool teacher, and she was the assistant preschool teacher there when I went to preschool there. And at the time, we lived just below the community center when we had first moved back to Cosby when my parents got out of college.
Miss Cochran was my teacher and principal. And we had another teacher named Miss Plummer, and she was from, I think, out west north. And then we had a teacher from Knoxville named Miss Akins. And those are the only three I remember. And of course Miss Cochran was not only a teacher, she was a principal. And she governed that place like she was a president. And I loved her. Lots of people did not, but I did. And she taught me to do a lot of things, including how to dust. I never will forget that. when I was maybe 8 or 9. She taught me how to dust and clean up the cottage which they lived in, the teachers, and the dispensary which was kept if anybody became ill. And she called the doctor in.
Betty had a sister that helped her up here. We all know her as Tootie. And her husband was Warnie Breeden. And he was a great human being. And we was all raised up together on Lower English Creek. And that's been quite a while ago. I come up here with my mom. Back then, that's been in the 50s, so that would be too many years to remember too much. But we come up to the clothing store with her. My older brother, the one that's deceased now, brought us up here in his car because I wasn't old enough to drive. And I've known Betty and Tootie and Warnie and David all my life. I was actually raised up with them. But that's been a lot of years. A lot of water's run under the bridge since that. The rest of the family I know quite well, because Betty and Tootie had several brothers. I went to school with part of them and I worked with part of them, but that's been quite a few years.
A couple of my memories that I really enjoyed was climbing trees. My two sisters had a dogwood tree that they would climb, and I was too small, but once I was able to climb that one, then they moved about 10 yards over to a maple tree, and they would climb up the maple tree, but I was too small, so I had to wait a year or two, and then I could climb the maple tree. And I knew that it was time to move on when I was up about 15 feet and the limb that I was on broke, and so I landed on the ground and shook my body, and I was fine, nothing damaged, but realized it was time to move on. So I looked around the yard and I found another oak tree, and it was a tricky one to get up, but once you were in there, there were lots of limbs to climb on, so that was so much fun. Get up there and just sit for 15 or 20 minutes looking around and all. But so climbing trees was a lot of fun back then. As we grew up was the Sunset Gap Community Center. We had 3 levels. On the bottom level at the time we had a thrift shop, a workroom, and a kitchen. And then upstairs there was other rooms and things, but on the very top we kept supplies like Christmas ornaments and decorations and things like that. So I would go up to the 3rd floor and I would crawl around, and we had a big bell up there that we would ring on Sunday mornings to start Sunday school and all. But I would go climb up into the bell tower and hang out up there, and then there was a little door that went out onto the roof, so I would go out onto the roof and climb up and over the back side of the center and just kind of sit there and look around, you know. And I don't think my dad probably knew I was there, but he probably wouldn't encourage me to be up there, but that's just part of growing up. We learn different things, so there we are. Another time we had a big fire. Each year some of our neighbors would burn off fields to get ready to plant new crops for the next year. And one time one of the fires got out of control, so a lot of the firefighters from Sevier County and Cocke County and probably Jefferson County came, and they were all helping us stop this fire before it got to the center. And it probably got within 100 to 200 yards away. And so I was out there, I don't know, I was probably 14 or 15, and I had fire extinguishers, and I just felt like I was helping a little bit, you know, but those big guys were trying to get the fire under control, and we finally did, and that was good. But you never knew with fires around our area. But luckily, all the people in the community would come together, and we would work together and save what needed to be saved.
I will start out by saying that it is fairly unusual for me to be on this side of the video because usually I'm always behind the camera, filming, editing, etc. Because I have a family connection with Sunset Gap on my mother's side of the family, the Williamses, I have been going there ever since I can remember. Probably my earliest memories of going to Sunset Gap would be going to church there when I was maybe 5 or 6. It's actually the youngest memory I have of going to any church anywhere, so it is nice that it would be Sunset Gap, of all places. And growing up, I feel like I had a fairly unusual childhood. First, I was homeschooled, and second, I still do work for my parents' business, so I have a lot of time to do things that other people my age wouldn't be able to do, such as going to Sunset Gap.
The story of Sunset Gap begins with my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather. Betty Jane Hicks married Ance Anderson Williams. Most people called him Ance. And they owned quite a bit of land in the Wilhite area. And all my great aunts and uncles, so my grandparents' generation, went to school at a little school in Wilhite named Juniper. But the church that ran the school decided to close it down, or the ministry that ran it decided to close it down. And that really concerned my great-grandmother because she wanted a place for her grandchildren to go to school, and those grandchildren would be my father's generation. So as the talk and the process began to shut down Juniper, my great-grandmother started the process of building a new school. And she was the first landowner to donate land in the community. Other families sold land for the center and the school to be built on, but my great-grandmother donated the land. And my father went to school there. I went to preschool there. My brother and my 2 sisters went to preschool there. My sister-in-law, Melissa, taught preschool there for many, many years. And Sunset Gap has always been a part of our history and has always been a part of our family's history. And it's a very special place to us, and our hope is that by watching these videos about the history of Sunset Gap, that Sunset Gap will be special to you too.
So, piggybacking off of Betty Williams' stories, she was the official summer work camp group cook the whole time that I was growing up at Sunset Gap. And there were 2 specific meals that I loved to join in on while she was there and I was there. And the first one is the biscuits and gravy breakfast that she would have. My very favorite breakfast to this day. And the second was any time that she made fried chicken. It was the best fried chicken I have ever had. And I've had some fried chicken in my day. But those were the 2 most favorite meals that I can think of. The favorite dessert was her blackberry cobbler. And the story about that is that she didn't purchase blackberries. She had her kids, so Joni, Duran, Karen, Sissy sometimes, but definitely Chrissy and I, and sometimes Dan. She would give us old milk cartons or bowls, and we would go down the road on one side toward our closest neighbor, and then we would walk back up and go down the road on the other side, picking all the blackberries that were on the bushes that lined the road. And then we would bring them all back, and Betty would put them in a cobbler, and we would have them that night for dessert. Best thing ever.
most of the people remember me from running the thrift shop. I had several different helpers along the way, and then after so many years, when I was running it by myself, my sister Tootie started helping me, and we worked that until, good said, we got too old. The thrift shop was there a long time before I started working there, but then it was called LaSalle. When the thrift shop was called LaSalle, it was upstairs in the room now that we call the Nook. When I was in elementary school, my mother bought our clothes at the sale. The sale was open twice a month, one day for the community and one day for the outsiders. And my mother would go on the day for the outsiders because we didn't live close enough to be in the community. When Bob Davis became the director there, we moved the sale out of the upstairs room downstairs to the room down there that used to be the library when school was going on, and then we named it the thrift shop. Twice a year, Allentown, Pennsylvania gathered a lot of clothing and sent down here, and they sent it out by transfer truck, and they couldn't make the corner to come up to Sunset Gap, so they had to unload the boxes down at the gas station in Newport. And I would take my pickup truck and go down there, and it would take me all day to haul all the boxes back up to Sunset Gap. I spent so much time there and in the thrift shop till I knowed everybody's footsteps when they was walking upstairs. I could tell how fast they were walking or how slow they were walking, the sound of their footsteps. And once I heard my daughter Karen come up there with her children, and they was going to surprise me, so they come in upstairs and down the steps, and I hollered at her, and she said, "How did you know it was me?" And I said, "Because I could tell by your footsteps."
Well, I remember going to Sunset Gap. For early memories, there wasn't no traffic much on that road. Mailman had come through, Daddy'd go in and out. He was cutting pulpwood we used to call it, when we first was there, and we would go to Sunset Gap Sunday School. They had the big room then, which was the auditorium. That's where they had Sunday school. Never had church, just Sunday school. I remember going there, and I remember going in the first pre-K class, preschool class that they ever had. Kay Davis, of course, was their teacher, and a fabulous teacher. I mean, I still marvel today at what she taught in the 60s and 70s. That's kind of considered the Bible in pre-K education now. And they had potluck suppers, of course, big 4th of July celebrations. Later on, after we moved from over there to where we live now, they'd started Boy Scout troop. Bob started it, and started a baseball league there in about 1970, and Daddy was the first president of it. We had teams at Sunset Gap, Smoky Mountain, Jones Cove, and Hartford. And so we played at Smoky Mountain, Sunset Gap, and Jones Cove. Played those little round robin. You'd play 2 games. I think we played 6 Saturdays in June, July. 4th of July was always a big celebration. Going there for Easter, Christmas. As Boy Scouts, we used to go out and cut the greenery on one Saturday on a local farm. Moved it around different places, and we'd come back and put Christmas trees up in every room, and put green boughs down both sides of the steps and put the lights on it. There was a little birth scene, I guess, Jesus' birth scene. There used to be a little building over there across the road from the center, and we'd put that manger scene up. I used to help get to do that. Halloween, they'd have big Halloween contests, people, different categories dress up. They'd have big tubs of apples, water. You had to bob for apples. And they'd tie them on strings down from the ceiling. And good times. Work camp groups were always fun. Of course, they had some permanent staff members back in the early mid-70s. They might be there 2 or 3 years, a lot of them just for one. One year I remember they had like 8 or 9 staff that was there. And they had a work camp group come in every summer. Mama cooked for it. And it was neat to meet people from different areas of the country, different colleges. They were, of course, that was the age of the hippies. And some of them had beards and longer hair. And the director, Bob, he told them they had to shave their beard and cut their hair shorter. And they did. And that was neat last 4th of July when quite a few of them came back for that celebration. Got to see them and relive old times. Several years we did a play during the summer. Work camp groups would work with us and we'd have parts and we'd perform for the community and they'd have popcorn popped and it'd be full. That auditorium would be full and it was really neat to do. Vacation Bible School. Another thing that was always fun when the groups would come in. And we'd learn. And I guess one of the first songs you learn is Jesus Loves Me. It's kind of neat to do. But potluck suppers, had them regularly, pretty much starting about May through October. Boy Scouts raised money. We'd have a spaghetti supper or a pancake supper. Then we'd auction off stuff, and cakes especially. It was always fun to see some of the men in the neighborhood try to run somebody else's price up on their wife's cake. So that was always neat. Those are a lot of the memories. And Grandma and Grandpa and Uncle Walt, they always walked, usually weather permitting, to Sunday school on Sunday, and then Daddy and us would take them home. And they never owned a car. None of them did. Grandpa didn't, and Grandma and Uncle Walt didn't. So they just walked Sunset Gap. And Grandpa and Uncle Walt, they always wore long sleeve shirts, even in the summer. They said it helped keep them cool. So they'd walk up there and be a part of the center and all the things that was going on there in the mid to late 60s and all through the 70s.
Continued to grow up there around the community center. Was a very integral part of my life. As I may have said, if I wasn't at home or at my grandparents' house or at Cosby School where I went to school for my entire education, then I was at the community center and spent a lot of time there. Going through school, a lot of times I would actually ride the bus, especially when I was really young. I would ride the bus and get off at Sunset Gap instead of getting off at home. On days where I was sick or if it was a vacation day, I was probably up at Sunset Gap, either with my mom or my grandmother, there around the thrift shop. I spent a lot of time playing with my cousin, Scott Jenkins, who lived just up the mountain there behind the community center. Scott was my cousin, one of my best friends. We graduated high school together. If we weren't playing and hanging out at his house, then we were running around down there at the community center, hanging out in the thrift shop, running around in the mountains behind the thrift shop, down on the ball field, shooting basketball, playing baseball, throwing horseshoes, doing all kind of stuff there at the community center. And so for me, it was a very, very essential part of making me who I am today there at Sunset Gap.
My home, built by my father, Gaither Williams, was next door to Grandma and Granddad, Elizabeth Hicks and Anse Williams. And I saw them practically every day when they were, the weather permitted, or we could walk out on the road and go talk to them. But they were always busy, busy, busy. They had the farm, they had their animals, and he was busy. If anybody died in the community, he would go, she would go too, and then she would cook for them. And when I came from Sunday school on Sundays, we'd have our service at Sunset Gap. That didn't last long, but we had it for a few years. And she would always have a loaf of bread and some jelly for us. I remember that exactly. But I lived next door to him and her until they both died. I was right by her bedside when she died. And Uncle Ward Walt and Aunt Lyon lived there at the time, next door to us. But my grandmother, Elizabeth or Betty Jane Hicks Williams, was a very stern, strict person, and you did not push her around. And she would tell you how to do something, and she didn't change it. And as far as her reading and writing, I saw her look at magazines and things that Grandpa had, particularly his law book, because he read the law. But I never saw her write anything except she would draw something. I saw her draw things, but I never saw her write anything. So to me, she could read and write, so that's all I know. But my grandfather, Ance Williams, was a person known to read the law. And what that meant, I don't know. He was not a graduate from any law school, but he had a book that came from Congress. It was special built with steel pins in it, and he could open it up and insert the supplementals that they sent him by mail. And anybody that wanted to hear about the Constitution or a new law passed, they came to him, and he read it to them. So I know he could read and write. And he would perform community services, fiddle playing for community services, funerals, weddings, family gatherings, or wherever they asked him. And if he got paid for it, I never heard of that. Back then, people just helped each other and did, because he did play the fiddle, and he played a lot of religious songs as well as I call bluegrass. And he would be gone from time to time, like 2 or 3 days at a time, and I never asked where he was. I just always heard he was working in the community. And what he was doing, I don't know. But the people came to him if they had a law question. I remember that very well. But like I said, I don't know if he was considered a constable or a deputy or what. Nobody ever said. But as far as Grandma's ability to read and write, I saw her pick up books, and I saw her talk to Grandpa about the letters he got from Congress to put in his little famous book he had. And I can only describe it, and it was very difficult and heavy to pick up. But she would look through that, so I know she could read that. I don't know how well she understood it, but they talked about it. So if she had questions, she went to him.
I started coming up here in 2015 or 2016, when we moved the food pantry down to the lower part, and I've been a volunteer ever since. That's been several years, but we went through a lot of people, a lot of volunteers, and a lot of good people, a lot of kids from other states has come and helped us and done an excellent job. We've got maybe 200 or more a year that will show up and help during school breaks, and a lot of them from Illinois, got a lot from Kentucky. We've got some from a lot of volunteers from Florida. But that's it up till today. We're here every Wednesday. Doing the pantry work is excellent. It gives you a good feeling to know that you're helping a lot of people in our poor county out, because it's not the richest county in the state, but it's good to know. It makes you have a good feeling when you leave. If you stay up here 5 hours, you stay up here 6 hours, or you stay up here 2 hours, it gives you a good feeling. And the people really seem like they appreciate it. So that's it. And we've got an excellent lady to work for. Audrey has really been good to us volunteers. Anytime we ask anything, she'll tell us. And that's about as good as you can go on that. We had a group, we had the governor's wife, Maria, and a group of volunteers out of Nashville come up and help us one day, and it was, I mean, cold that day. It was absolutely cold that day. I've got a picture in my phone of me and her down there, and she said, "I'm froze to death." I said, "I am too." That was last year. It's been a year. It'll be a year this when it gets in cold weather. But she is a fine seaman lady. She was nice to us and worked good, better than I did. But Governor Lee's wife, Maria, right? Maria. And several of her staff worked with us. And maybe five or six of them worked with us. And that was a good. The biggest group we had was out of Illinois. They was like 40 of them, and we just got back out of the way and let them do the work. But they was good workers. So they was about half girls and boys, college students, and they were good. We really met some nice people.
Hey, it's Dan again. Another story that I remember was being involved with our Boy Scout troop, Troop 291. My dad was a scoutmaster, and I was pretty young in there, but I was a quartermaster, so I was in charge of the food. And we had this little pup tent that I was in, and at the feet area I had the food, and I was at the near the door area, and we were out on a camp out, and it rained that night, and all the guys set up their tents with the doors facing up instead of down. So when the water ran off the hill, it ran right into my tent, and I slept right through it until some of the other fellows woke me up, and they said, "Hey, Dan, we're heading to the van." And I said, "What for?" And they said, "Well, our tents are flooded." And I said, "Well, I'm okay." And they said, "No, you're not. Look down." And I looked at my feet, and I had a big puddle down there. And so we all headed to the van for the rest of the night, and learned a lesson on how to put up a tent in the future, door down so that the water will go around. So that was interesting. One time we were fishing at scout camp. We went to a camp called Camp Buck Tom's, and it was in Roane County, probably a couple hours from here or so. But when we weren't in merit badge classes in the evenings and things, a couple of my buddies and I would go fishing out on the lake or along the lake bank, and every once in a while we would see boats go by, and it would get late and it would be dark, and so we were just young guys, maybe 13, 14, 15 years old, so we didn't know any better, and we would hear a boat coming by, and we would get our flashlights and we would aim them towards the boat, and somebody didn't like that because the boat came towards us, and as they got closer we could see that they were wearing sheets, white sheets, and so that made us think of an organization that might not be friendly to scouts, with the Ku Klux Klan. We didn't know that for sure because we didn't stick around. We ran and got back to our camp and realized we'd left all of our equipment there, but we weren't about to go back. Equipment, fishing rods and tackle boxes and things like that. So the next day we went back to our fishing spot and everything was gone. And we learned another valuable lesson. Don't be flashing flashlights at people you don't know in the middle of the night out on a lake. So learned the lesson, and we all survived that one. Another great story was scouting. We had a dinosaur egg hunt contest, and we had a few of us there at scout camp, and a couple of us were knew a lot more about nature than I did, and so they could identify the differences in sugar maples and other kind of maples, maple tree leaves and things. So one of the things was you had to identify this leaf, and one of the boys took the leaf and put it in his mouth and chewed it up, and he said, "That's a sugar maple," and he was right. So we won enough of those contests to where we won a watermelon for our troop. So that was pretty cool. And another opportunity at scout camp was the watermelon fight contest at Camp Buck Tom's, and I guess we were all about 15, and there were 2 or 3 of us from our troop in there, and there was probably about 20 boys, and we all had to grease up, and then they threw a watermelon out 15 feet away, and they said, "Okay, go get it." And so we were all after the watermelon, and I got to it, and me and about 3 other guys or 4 other guys had our arms wrapped around the watermelon, thinking we were gonna, each of us had it, and the watermelon kind of broke up, but I had the biggest piece, so they gave us a watermelon. So that was pretty cool. So loved scout camp. My dad was our scoutmaster, and we just had the best time, and earned merit badges and learned things we didn't know before, and had lots of opportunities we might not have had if we hadn't been involved. But so that's scouts, you know. Grew up to be an Eagle, so that was good. And my son got into scouts when he was 12, and he made it to life before football, high school football, got him away. So, but life was good growing up at Sunset Gap.
Here's a story you may like. Back when I was probably around 13, this was probably back when Kenny Morgan was the director, I was taking people's names on what was probably a July 4th celebration. And what we would do is we'd collect all the names, put them in a container, and what we had is what I'm going to call it a money booth. It looked like a telephone booth, and you put somebody in there, and you had some loose cash in there, turn on the fans, and all the money would spin around, and you had to catch as much of it as you can, put it in a slot, and at the end of a minute or however much time, you got to keep what you had put in the box. So I was taking people's names, they would write it down, put it in a little container, and my mom asked me, "Well, why don't you put your name in there?" And I was first hesitant, but eventually she did persuade me to write my name and put it in there. And there was probably 100 or more names in there, and I was also the one to pull the names back out again, read it, and announce who got to go in the money booth. The first time I pulled one out, it was some random boy. A little later, I pulled another name out. Me. When I pulled it out, I thought first, hey, maybe I could just put it back in, because I didn't want the same person announcing who gets to go in there, announcing themselves. Felt it was a little dishonest, but of all the chances, it just happened to be me. So I felt as if I could just put it back in there, but I suddenly realized at that moment, if I put my name back in there, nobody's going to believe that I put my own name back in there, and they would think I have a grudge against somebody else. So, put it back up, and I said, "You're never going to believe this, but it's me." And then, of course, the people in the auditorium laughed, and there was no problems that arise. I didn't get too much money in there. It's a lot harder than you would think to grab money that's going everywhere around you all at once. But I learned a lesson that day. Don't write down your own name in something you're participating in. You just might win.
And my dad's story that I want to share with you is about his salvation. So my dad went to school at Sunset Gap from 1st grade to 8th grade, and there were mission work groups that would come and minister in the area, most of them from up north, but they could be from anywhere. This particular summer, when my dad was in the 6th grade, one of the mission workers asked him if he wanted to pray and ask Jesus to come into his heart. And my dad said yes, he did want to pray. So some of the work camp group staffers led him down the steps from the old kitchen, and he said he knelt onto the grass and asked Jesus to be his Savior. And Sunset Gap for us is all about stories, and it's all about memories, and that is one of our special stories and special memories about Dad getting saved at Sunset Gap. And Sunset Gap is a big part of our family's spiritual heritage and spiritual history. So I hope you enjoyed that story about Dad accepting Jesus as his Savior. And now, as part of our family's history with Sunset Gap, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my mom. Her name is Betty Williams. She was a Bryant, that was her maiden name, and she and Dad got married in 1960. And as soon as she and Dad got married, Mom started volunteering at Sunset Gap. They lived over near Sunset Gap, and of course my dad had history with Sunset Gap, so my mom started volunteering up there in different roles. But my brother was born in 61, my sister in 63, and me in 64. So by May of 1965, my mom had officially joined the staff of Sunset Gap as the thrift shop coordinator. And at this point, she has functioned as the thrift shop coordinator for 60 years. She doesn't work every day or even every week or even every month as she did in the beginning, because she's 82 years old now, but she still has worked at Sunset Gap for a very, very long time. And in addition to being the thrift shop coordinator, she would also cook for the work camp groups, the summer groups that would come to do ministry work in the area or ministry work at the center. She would cook for them. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a different segment, but our family has a long history with Sunset Gap, and it is a really special place for all of us. So we'll talk more about the other later.
Okay, the next story is about Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. And scouting was a big thing when I was little. Daddy was the Boy Scout leader, and Mama was the Girl Scout leader for years. And then the Girl Scouts got taken over by whoever was on the summer staff for that year. So it freed up Mama to have a full-time job outside of Sunset Gap. So all during my growing up years, Daddy would take the Boy Scouts anywhere and everywhere, it seemed like, so that they could have all these wonderful experiences. And the Girl Scouts got to stay around Sunset Gap and or Cosby Park. I can remember going overnights there. So it was decided one year that the Girl Scouts would go to Virginia Beach. And that was a great opportunity, because most of the girls that were in the troop at that time, which included Carol Ann Stewart and Gaynell Stewart and Judy Webb, Chrissy and I were both in that troop. Barbara Webb was in that troop, and other local girls that went to Cosby. And so we took off in the van, in the Sunset Gap van, and I can remember all the luggage. We took the back seat out of the van, but I can remember all the luggage was piled up in the very, very back. And there were some of us girls that would go back to the very back and just lay across the luggage while we were traveling. That was before seatbelts were mandated, obviously, but that was a very fun part of that trip. But we would sing, and Mom would teach us some other songs, some hiking songs or camping songs or traveling songs, and anywhere we went, Mom would be singing in any vehicle. So we got to Virginia Beach, and like I said, it was the first time that many of the girls had ever seen the ocean, and so we decided to go swimming, not knowing that the beach that we were at was the home of jellyfish. And several of us went in the water, but Carol Ann got stung several times by the jellyfish. And so Mom herded us all back into the van and took Carol Ann to the hospital to get cared for. And although it was a really fun trip going there, the trip back was a little bit more subdued. To end that, Carol Ann was all right though. Everything was fine.
When I cooked for the work camp groups, I had to, some mornings I would have to be up there at 5, sometimes at 6, and because I had to do everything, had to make my biscuits and everything by scratch. I had to, after breakfast, I had to get everything ready to start preparing lunch. Then after lunch, I would go every other day. I went into Newport and bought the groceries because I only had enough space to keep a day and a half's worth. I only had one stove and one refrigerator. So every other day I had to go in and buy more groceries. On Thursdays I would go up and fix breakfast for the work camp group, and then as soon as we got through breakfast, I would start frying my chicken, make potato salad, and they'd eat their lunch, which was usually some kind of sandwiches or something. And then after lunch, I'd have all the picnic, which I'd have a watermelon, a loaf of bread. I'd send a big old knife for them to cut the watermelon with. They had to take the silverware and stuff because we didn't have any plastic spoons. So they'd bring all them back. And we would, then they would eat. After the thrift shop was closed, I could get to come home that evening and not have to stay so late at night. And they would, they really enjoyed their picnic lunch.
Well, Boy Scouts, you could join 3 months before your 11th birthday. So I joined in October of 70, and 71 rather. And that next summer was the first big trip that Reverend Davis, the scoutmaster, and David Ross, the assistant scoutmaster, took us on. We went out west for 2 weeks. You know, we stayed first night in Memphis, then Oklahoma, and it come bad winds and blowed our tents over and around. And then we went out and stayed in New Mexico one night. Then we stayed 2 nights to Grand Canyon. Well, I think I was the youngest one on the trip. And a lot of 13, 14, 15-year-old boys. There were 12 of us. Then we went up to Grand Tetons in Yellowstone. Went over to Mount Rushmore. The thing about Mount Rushmore, we stayed in that campground right below the monument. There's a campground there. And we got to leave school 5 days early because of the way Bob had it planned. They let us stay. If the school system had not let us leave and go 5 days early, we would have been in that campground the night it come a flash flood and it killed some Boy Scouts. So that was a sad thing, but one memory. So we enjoyed that. The next year we went to Florida, saw Cape Canaveral, Marine World, went to the beach. 74 we didn't go anywhere because we saved money to go to Canada. In 75 we went to Toronto and Ontario. I saw the Montreal Expos play in the old Jarry Park. It was a minor league park. They were just before they finished Olympic Stadium where they played for a long time. So that was neat to go on those trips. And every summer we went to Camp Pellissippi on Norris Lake. We'd go over and stay, I think, 5, go over on Sunday evening and come back, Saturday morning. And that was neat. You got to shoot bow and arrows. You got to shoot .22s. You got to do all kind of wood carving, weaving, with reeds and make little mats and stuff. Got to swim out in had big swimming cribs you could get in. And the boys that were going for their life-saving merit badge, they got to swim out the mile swim in the open lake. And they had called a watermelon fight. And what they'd do is they'd throw a couple of watermelons in that big crib, and it was 8 foot deep and had a bottom to it. But you had to lather each other up with lard before you got in there. Well, they told me to do it. Well, I couldn't swim good at all, hardly. Bob and float water. So they greased me up, and they threw them watermelons in there, and then they pushed us all in or jumped in. Well, I went under and come up and was gasping for air and trying to hold on to the side of the crib to keep afloat. And all of a sudden, that watermelon come right up under me. And that guy, I grabbed it, and it squirted out of my arms, and the guy dumped me. The watermelon went down, and it come back up again, and I just grabbed it and threw it up on the dock. So we had watermelon that night, and I was the hero of our troop. So that's kind of fun. But Boy Scout camp was neat. You had merit badge committees. My dad was on several merit badge committees, and you'd have courts of honor where everybody received their awards. I got my Eagle Scout on 4th of July 1975. It's a little card I've got. Has Gerald Ford, President's signature on it. So that was a big honor to get to achieve your Eagle Scout. Learned a lot, at the Scout Law and all that. Got a loyal, trustworthy, clean, brave, courteous, reverent, all those. And I think I earned about 44, 45 merit badges. So it was a good time. We did some community service too. But you learned to have a role in Scouts. It taught you leadership. You learned a lot about citizenship in the world, citizenship in the United States, citizenship in your community, environmental science, life saving, all kind of different home and garden repairs. It's just really neat to look back on all the things we learned and the camaraderie we had. And of course, got to see a lot of trips, got to see a lot of the country with the Boy Scouts. So it was really neat. I enjoyed my time in scouting.
You know, even with all the activities that I got to be a part of and everything going around the center there at Sunset Gap, you know, some of my best memories were just getting to hang out there in the thrift shop with my grandmother and her sister, Aunt Tootie, who was my great aunt, my grandmother's sister. They ran the thrift shop there, and so as I said, you know, if I was sick from school or it was a vacation day and my mom and dad were still working, I might have to stay in the thrift shop with them, and that probably sounded like it was boring, but maybe when I was 6 or 7 years old, it was like a wonderland to me. There was all kind of neat junk. Of course, there was always different things coming into the thrift shop, whether it was tools or books or clothes, but of course they had toys. And when I was a kid, when you're 6 or 7 years old, and there's new junk toys coming in there every day, I loved it to get to go through there, and even if it wasn't something that I was going to take home myself, just to play with it and leave it there, was a lot of fun. And it was just a treasure hunt every day, and that was always fun. Of course, after a hard day of playing, if it was 2 or 3 o'clock and I'd had lunch and I'd played outside and things like that, I might need a nap. And so they had big, strong wooden tables that had clothes on them, and I would just go make myself a bed on one of those, especially in the back. They had like a back section that was mostly the men's clothes. And you didn't have as many men that would come in as you did ladies. And so I was usually safe back there to go back there and not be in anybody's way, go back there and make a big pallet bed on one of those tables in those men's clothes. And of course, the thrift shop had a very particular smell, and if I still go in that today, it triggers a very strong sense of nostalgia for me, the way that place smells. Not good, not bad, just maybe old because you had used clothes in there, but of course the building itself was so very long. So if I walk in there today, of course now it seems a lot smaller. When I was a kid, I would have swore that place was probably like 2,000 square feet, right? And now I walk in there and I feel like I got a duck when I go into the room, because the ceilings are probably only like 7 feet or whatever, and so it feels a lot smaller. Where I could say in my mind's eye, when I think back, it seems a lot bigger in there. But I used to like, of course, there was no TV, even if they had a TV, you probably wouldn't have gotten good reception in the mountains back then. At our house, I think we got 1.5 stations maybe. I say a half, the other one might have been fuzzy, which we had antenna, but there was no TV there at Sunset Gap, but there was a radio. And so one thing I like to do is listen to the radio. A favorite of mine was Paul Harvey. And so a lot of younger people might not know who Paul Harvey was today, but Paul Harvey was kind of news and variety. And of course, he had a great radio voice, and he would talk about news, and then he would tell stories. And of course, if you are old enough to remember Paul Harvey, one of my favorite segments was he would start to tell a story, and you didn't know who he was talking about, and at the end, a lot of times the story would be about somebody who was famous or significant, but it would be something unknown from their lives. And he would say, and now you know the rest of the story. And so I like to always catch Paul Harvey on the radio. They would have the radio on, and usually it would be news, but sometimes it would be country music too. I can remember, my grandmother and her sister Aunt Tootie listening to some of those older, of course, again, back in the 80s, it might have been, Conway Twitty or George Strait or some of those guys there doing some country music, something like that. I remember sitting there listening to country music and things like that, and the things, they would always take care of me, feed me lunch, anything I needed, and it was just great because the whole day was just open. You had as a kid, you had no responsibilities. And I had a playground to play on, basketball courts. I had mountains to explore. So even if I was by myself, which often I was, it was just endless. I could explore the thrift shop or the grounds or whatever I wanted to do. And all I really had to do was stay out of the road for that one car that might come through once an hour or whatever it was. It wasn't always a very happening place. And sit around and listen to my grandmother and her sister tell stories and talk about people they knew and things that was going on in the community. Of course, like I said, sometimes my cousin Scott was there and we get to play together, but if not, I might be the only kid that would be around. And so I just I spent a lot of time with the adults and listening to what they saw. So I probably knew a lot more everybody else's business than I should have, but that was a lot of big time. Like I said, that was a lot of my early life there was growing up there in the thrift shop.
Miss Cochran was the principal of our Sunset Gap School, and also she taught. She taught many subjects. She was a very intelligent lady and very, very strict. And she had to be like a strict sergeant because we had some wild boys in that class and a few girls. Same way, but she would not put up with any foolishness. And when she sent you home, you were in trouble. Because the parents in those days would discipline their children, so when they went back to school, they didn't pull that trick again. But Miss Cochran, when she come in, you'd be seated after you said the Pledge of Allegiance and your song, military songs, like the caisson to go rolling. We did one for each branch of service, not every day, but occasionally. And we saluted the flag every day. And she had a prayer every day, and then she gave you a cod liver oil spoon every day. And if you didn't take it, that was your fault. I took it. And it didn't bother me. But she seemed to have a few favorites in class, but she didn't portray that at all. Her students were all treated alike. And I learned a lot from Miss Cochran, and I appreciated it. And I liked her, but some people did not, and some of the parents did not, because she was so strict with her children. And she'd send them home, and the parents would get upset, but she didn't mind. That was her job, and she did it. And she was there the entire time I was there. And when my mother died, she taught me a lot of feminine cleanliness that I knew nothing about, and I'm sure a lot of the girls didn't. And she taught us how to clean house, how to dust, and clean up our school desk. We had to keep that clean. You didn't write on it, you cleaned it up. And you didn't carve on it. If she caught you, you were in trouble. But I appreciated her because You knew what you went to school for. You didn't go to play. You went to learn and follow her rules, and you did it or else. She'd whack you with a ruler or otherwise. And I did get hit one time for being the smart, excuse the language. But she did whack me across the hand one time with a ruler. I was talking back to her. You don't do that. And the boys did it. She put them out of the classroom immediately. I don't care if it was raining, snowing, or whatever. You did what she said. She had to. She was a woman in charge. Came there as a missionary, and I know nothing about her mission work, but that's what my grandmother started doing with her, was mission work, and that's how they got interested in building the school there.
When the building burnt, I was with the Collegeville Volunteer Fire Department, and I come up here, but it was already engulfed in flames, and there wasn't nothing we could do but just keep it from spreading. That was 20 years ago, I guess, somewhere like that. But that's the one time I was up here. But other than that, the only times that I'd come up here would be with my mom when she'd come to the store out there. But that's about it. That's about all we've done.
One of the activities we had at Sunset Gap was Community Day, and that would be a time when we would take a van and go pick up all the kids in the area, probably within 10 miles or so, and bring them back to do activities. But I would ride with them when they would go home. And so as we were driving down Wilhite Road into Sevier County from Sunset Gap, about 3 to 4 miles away, we were on this old gravel road, and I noticed this thing walking on the side of the road on the right side, and it had a yoke on its shoulders, and on each side of the yoke were pails. And as we got closer, and again we're driving in a van, as we got closer I could see he had a hat on, but when we passed him he had a snout and a big beard, and it looked like he had hooves. And so I wasn't sure exactly what that was. Normally people wear boots or tennis shoes or something like that, but this fella had hooves. So it's the first time I'd ever seen that. So I'll remember it forever, probably. But so you see certain things as you're growing up that you don't understand, but that's okay.
As I said earlier, I had a fairly unusual upbringing by what would be considered normal American standards, and I still do have a lot of time to help out at Sunset Gap today. Now, part of it is just going down there, helping with a couple things, usually on Wednesdays, but sometimes we'll be called to help get donations from one place, load it up, drive it back to Sunset Gap so we could be sold in a thrift shop, at an auction, and so forth. This one particular day was on the hot afternoon of Tuesday, April the 4th, 2023. There was a lady whose mother lived in Newport, and we, my mom, myself, my two brothers, took a minivan and a pickup truck, but we probably should have taken a trailer too, because she had a lot of things in her home to be unloaded, and it took a long time. And just to give you a little bit of an idea, the first thing we did when we get there, we took most of the stuff out of the house and just set it on the ground along the pathway so we could load it up into the vehicles later. That wasn't so bad. You had a couple heavy things now and then, but it wasn't so bad. There was 4 of us. But inside the house was warmer than outside. The lady's mother was quite old and she wanted to stay warm. It makes sense, but it didn't make it much easier on us. But the very, very last thing we had to lug out of that house was a very large TV cabinet. And it wasn't like you would expect it to be in the living room where you could just get right out the front door. It was in one of the bedrooms down the hallway. It was very, very difficult to maneuver it out that doorway, down the hallway, then out the front door, and then get it from near the door down, then get it into the vehicle. It probably took 30 minutes to an hour just to get that one TV cabinet out. It was not an easy thing to do. But the story doesn't end there. When we got to Sunset Gap, fortunately there was a work camp group that helped us unload all the stuff. Unfortunately, that TV cabinet broke, so all of that work was for naught. And of course, what we'd do is we'd take some of the donations, and some of it we'd put in different places. Some of it would be the auditorium, etc. And some of the members of the work camp group, they were playing on the piano that they had in the auditorium. And when we finished unloading everything, I noticed they weren't there anymore, so I figured I might as well play it. Nobody's around, so I might as well just relax for a few minutes. And for reference, I was not extremely good at the piano back then, but I have been playing for a very, very long time. Took lessons when I was a child, but after one point we stopped taking lessons. I don't remember why. My teacher has since retired since then. But a couple years ago I started getting back into it again, and the time of this recording of the instruments I can play that I would not consider to be gimmicks or novelties would be the piano, the melodica, the accordion, the dulcimer, and the Irish whistle, and counting. So I was just sitting there playing the song, and I believe it was Morrison's Jig. It's an Irish song. Of course, it's a jig. It's a dance song. So some of the girls that were helping us unload the vehicles, they started coming in there and prancing around like, "You want me to stop?" "Oh, that's fine. You can keep going." So I played, and they had their fun and everything as far as that's concerned. And I played some more songs, and they sang to some of them, they danced to others. One of them even started beatboxing to Amazing Grace. And then a little bit later on, one of the ladies from that work camp group said, "Oh, all right, girls, we've got something to do. We're going to move the ice machine out of the kitchen and take it away so they can get a new one." And I figured I might as well help out. So we went to the side door from the auditorium, and they had the van pulled up and the hatch was open. But the problem is, on that deck, the ice machine was too tall for them to get it in there. So the idea was to pull the van forward so we could tilt it in there. So that's what we did. With a little trouble though. For some reason, after the van pulled forward, it suddenly started coming backwards again. Fortunately, nobody was hurt, but after that lady got out of that vehicle, I looked her right in the eye and said, we were this close from having to call 911. Because one of the girls was just sitting there right back here waiting to load the ice machine, and the van almost hit her right in the legs. Whew. But the story doesn't end there either. After we got back into the auditorium from loading that old ice machine in, I played the piano a little bit more, but things were different. For some reason, those girls thought it would be kind of fun to ask me some questions. They started out fairly unusual, things like, what do you prefer, hot dogs or hamburgers? And just random questions like that. Later on, they started asking me questions about politics. At that point, I knew things had gone too far. They also asked me some questions that I pretended not to understand. They said things like, what do you prefer, blondes or brunettes? So I pretended to not understand their question by looking at my own hair color. I don't know if they fell for my acting job or not. I didn't have to answer their questions. I don't care. But ever since then, I have been very, very cautious about when I play the piano in that auditorium. But the story doesn't end there. About a year later, in 2024, my grandmother, Betty Williams, we wanted to have her deck redone. Some of the boards were getting old. And we said, maybe we get a work camp group to do it. So we contacted the director, Miss Audrey, and we got things to work out. But I was kind of suspicious about which group it might be. Now, the first work camp group that I mentioned of the girls interrogating me after the piano recital, that work camp group was from Michigan. And I don't remember how I found it out, but after I learned that this group that was going up and working on Nana's deck was also from Michigan, I got very, very suspicious. And she lives right up the hill from here, so what I did was I opened the bathroom window and listened, because she lives just up the hill from here. You can easily hear conversations going up on the driveway. And when one of those ladies told my mom, "Hey, I remember you," there was no way I was going up there. Now, thinking back on it now, I probably could have gone back up there with no trouble, because thinking back on it, the girls that were there at Sunset Gap in 2023 were alone, because probably the rest of the group was out working on a house, and this was the group that was working on a house, so the same individuals probably wouldn't be there. Of course, that didn't cross my mind at the time. I don't mean to make it sound like it was too horrible of a thing. They were just trying to have fun. I just really didn't enjoy that experience. But they did do a good job on Nana's deck. And the intern at that time, Kylie, I told her about what happened, and she told me that the same work camp group broke the air hockey table in the foyer and didn't tell Miss Audrey about it. So I thought, yeah, that really doesn't surprise me too much. But I really can't say that much bad about it. That sounds like something I would do, especially when I was younger. So ever since then, I've been extremely cautious when I play the piano in the auditorium, and I've always looked for Michigan license plates on the vehicles. And I don't hate those girls for what happened that day. I just have personality conflicts with Slap Happy High School girls. And they did some other things. They said, "Hey, what do you look like with your glasses on?" Because I had my glasses pinned to my shirt. And of course I'd put them on upside down like this. And the other times they would ask me how old I thought they were. And I was getting fairly spiteful, and so I would guess 2! Probably shouldn't have done that, but that's what happened anyway.
So my mom worked at Sunset Gap for many, 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 many years, and a big part of that was cooking for the work camp groups that would come to do mission work in the area. And one of the things they asked of her was that she would talk for them. They liked her accent. They liked the way she said certain words. It wasn't a pretense with her. It was just the way she talked. And they weren't making fun of her. They really genuinely wanted to hear her talk. So part of that was they would ask her to tell them ghost stories. And there were several stories about Sunset Gap and ghosts and spirits and things like that. Now, I myself have never seen anything like that at Sunset Gap. I've never heard any strange noises. I'm not afraid to be in the buildings by myself. It never bothered me. I have slept in the old craft house before it burned down, and I was never afraid. But my dad did tell stories about some of the early teachers, how one of them was supposedly tormented by a ghost during the night, and they found her locked in her bathroom in the where she'd slept in the bathtub that night. And I don't remember if she resigned or not, but supposedly that spirit's name was Caleb. I don't know much about that, but I do know that my mom would tell stories about the caskets being underneath the stage in the auditorium. So the stage is a little bit above the level of the main floor, and there's a sort of a sliding trap door, and you could get a flashlight and look back in there and see what looked like empty wooden boxes. Now I know that the craft house was used as a hospital and a TB clinic, and you would assume that some people did die there, which would lead credence to the stories about the ghosts and the stories about the caskets. So Mom would tell the work camp group and the summer staffers about these empty caskets underneath the floor. And I know my brother and Becky Davis looked under there one time, and that was kind of an interesting story. But we had our own experience. Danny Davis and I and a couple of the work camp group boys got a flashlight and looked under there, and we didn't see any boxes, we didn't see any caskets, but it was still a good story. She wasn't telling the stories to scare anybody, she was just entertaining them, and they were very entertained. And even after it was pretty much confirmed there weren't any caskets under there, she still kept telling the story to the subsequent groups, and they still enjoyed it. So interesting times for all of us, and you don't need to be afraid to go up there.
Piggybacking also on Betty's ghost story memories, she did. She was a very good storyteller, and the work camp groups loved hearing Betty stories. So the Betty story that I recall the very most is her ghost stories. And she talked about the coffins under the stage in the Sunset Gap Community Center. So Duran and I don't remember if there were anybody else. I don't know if Danny was there, or if Chrissy was there, or if Karen or Joni were there. But Duran and I remember he had the flashlight. And so we opened the door on the stage and looked under, and we could see a coffin. We could see probably a child-size coffin. And so we thought, how do we get to that? And neither one of us wanted to go down that hole from the stage. So we figured out that the best way to get to it was directly underneath, seemed to be like behind the kitchen. You would go in the kitchen, and then there was a hidden door, a door in the pantry that was behind an ice maker. And so we went through that door, and again, I don't remember if it was anybody but me and Duran. We went through the door and walked. It was an unfinished area back there, so it was like a hill of dirt, earth, and we walked as far as we could get, and we thought, okay, this has got to be the area where that box was. There was no box. Nothing was there. And so we thought about it, and my memory is that we had gone back up afterwards to the stage area and opened the door again and looked, and there wasn't a box that time. So we don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. I haven't talked to Duran to know if he knows what happened or if he even remembers that. But that was another ghost story from the coffins under the stage. There's a second ghost story that goes along with that. But this one took place up in the craft house, or the dormitory. The Girl Scouts were having a sleepover in the craft house, and there were about 3 of us that had gone on. We had been over at the center for whatever we were doing, and then the 3 of us decided to go on up the hill to the craft house and get our bedding ready and all. And so we went upstairs to the girls' side of the dorm and got our things all prepared for the evening, and none of the other girls had come yet. They weren't, they weren't there. But the 3 of us heard steps coming up the steps to our side of the dorm room, the girls' room. And we waited and waited and waited some more, and nobody came up those steps. But all three of us heard the steps. Somebody or something was coming up those steps. And I have yet to figure out how or what that was. My last ghost story involves the picture of a man, I don't know who he was, but there was a framed, I don't know, 18 by 24 or 24 by 36 picture of this man over the foyer fireplace in the center. And it hung there for years. But whenever I would go in there alone, and Daddy's office was on the top floor just to the right, and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts were over top floor on the left, and preschool was back in the back left corner as you were facing the foyer. Anywhere a person would stand in the foyer, the eyes of that man would be looking directly at you. How that happened, I don't know. But to this day, I still don't like to go in the building by myself.
Before Sunset Gap had indoor bathroom, they had an outhouse a few feet from the back of the building, where is now the kitchen on that corner. In the late 1960s, we built the 2 bathrooms upstairs that used to be the cloakroom for when the school was going on. Around 1995, built the first bathroom downstairs because I was taking my cancer treatments and I was too weak to go upstairs. When the work camp groups would come, they would leave mementos there of what they had been doing all week, if it was vacation Bible school or working on somebody's house or around the building, and they'd put it on a plank or a board or something, and they used to hang them around all in the building, and when it got a lot hanging in it, they'd take the older ones down to put up new ones, and they'd stack them in the little shed out there, and some of them got lost like that, and then they got to putting them over in the dorm, and when the dorm burned, a lot of their mementos got burned in that. When Sunset Gap was first built, there was a concrete floor, and right in the middle of it had a trough that drained the water off from the back of the building, and it come all the way down through the middle and run out right in front. And people didn't know what it was there for, so they filled it up with concrete. And that has what's caused part of the water issues up there now. And when the school first started there, they gave them a dose of cod liver oil every day, and then they had to brush their teeth, and that's where they brushed their teeth, and they spit the stuff out of it down in that little trough, and it ran it all the way out down through there. The upstairs, where the auditorium and the kitchen is, was one big room, but it had folding doors to separate 2 rooms there, and then they decided to take the doors down and just make it all one big long room, and they were going to throw some of the doors away, and I saved one of them, and my son Duran cut it down and fixed it and made my granddaughter a headboard for her a bed. So we got a little piece of the center there.
Well, of course, all kind of, a lot of older people used to tell stories about haints, and goblins, and ghosts. And every little area had one. Usually every family had one, but not specifically about Sunset Gap, but the house that I grew up in, my great uncle Gaith had built it. And it's just a 3-room house. It had a living room with a fireplace. It had a bedroom, and it had a kitchen, long kitchen. Didn't have hot water, didn't have a bathroom, but outside toilet. It did have electricity and cold water. But one of our relatives had a wife who had died in childbirth. And right after I was born, Mama got me home, and Daddy was out working cutting pulpwood. And Mama said she would notice like a vision of a lady high up in the corner. And she had her arms crossed, she had long dark hair. And she was just staring at me and Mama. And she had a white ruffled top on, and it went to about mid-thigh. It was a purple skirt, and it just kind of blended to nothing. Mama said she had never said nothing and never threatened, and Mama didn't do anything except there and rock me. But she'd ask about it later on, and I think that lady's name was Rachel, but she had died in childbirth and everything. And then somebody else said they saw that same dark-haired lady up on the hill at the cemetery above where I grew up, the Williams Cemetery, and they had the purple maroon dress and a white blouse. So I mean, of course, I was too little to realize it, but that's what Mama said. Still swears to this day that happened. As far as Sunset Gap goes, yeah, Mama used to tell all kind of ghost stories about up there. People's told tales here. The big thing was the old Craft House built in 1928. It was a TB clinic at one time, and I reckon there was 4 or 5 people that died in there. And Aunt Tootie, especially, when she used to clean it in the late 80s and the 90s, she said she saw a spirit in there. And Missy, my wife, she said she always felt uncomfortable in there. And I went to Bulgaria in early 2000s when I was working on my doctorate with some grad students from UT Knoxville, and we hosted them back over here that next year. And I had them all come up. There was about 6 of them, and they stayed at the Craft House that night. And I was telling them some of those stories. That next day, that one of those professors swore that something shook her awake, and when she opened up, it just kind of misted away. That was upstairs. Now, the Craft House is burnt now. And there, at one time, was supposed to be some wooden coffins under the old stage area. Well, that would make sense if that had been a TB clinic, that people were dying in the coffins. Somebody made them. But me and Becky Davis, we did. We took that little door off the stage and looked, and we saw probably like for a baby. And they may have stored more coffins in there. And we couldn't figure out, really didn't want to crawl back under there on that dirt and stuff. So we went down to the old kitchen. There's a pantry and a door there blocked by an ice machine at the time. Well, we squeezed around it, walked back in there, and got to where we'd seen that coffin, and it wasn't there. We went back upstairs and looked, and it wasn't there. So, I mean, I saw that in my own 2 eyes. Now, I never saw nothing unusual in the Craft House, and I used to be afraid to go up in the bell tower. Then I got used to going up there as I got older. That's when I was a little kid. And it was just peaceful. I could go up there, you know, and just sit and look out through the louvers and look down the valley and feel that breeze blow in and just think about all the good times I'd had there. But that's the only ones, Tootie and Mama, that told those ghost stories. I did see a little coffin, and there were people that had died in the Craft House, probably in the 30s or early 40s.
Growing up in Cosby, you know, especially in the 80s and early 90s, there wasn't always a lot to do for a kid. And so for me, I was always involved in sports. I played baseball and football from the time I was about 4 or 5 years old, and later basketball, and those things kept me busy. But, you know, as a kid, again, it was a community center, and Sunset Gap offered activities that would keep a kid busy really all the year round. So I'm just thinking about some of the activities that they did throughout the year that were really, I mean, just I spent so much time there. And you could start with, you know, in the spring, obviously around Easter, there was always going to be an Easter egg hunt and games at Easter, and that was such a big thing, especially when I was a younger kid, and that was a lot of fun. During the summertime, a lot of times they had 4th of July celebrations, but more distinctively, I remember Vacation Bible School and summer camp. They would have a week of each. When I was a kid, they had work camp groups that came in, usually from up north, and so there would be one group that would do the Vacation Bible School. A lot of times that was a group from the same place, year after year, and then groups would come in and do a summer camp as well, and so that would be like 2 whole weeks of my summer vacation that I spent up there, just going to those, and a lot of times that would be other cousins of mine that I would be there with, or friends, and it was just a lot of fun for me as a kid in the summertime. In the fall, I remember having Halloween celebrations up there. That was the big thing, you know. We're out here in the country, and so trick-or-treating, you know, if I wanted to go trick-or-treating as a kid, there might be 4 or 5 houses that my parents or my grandparents would feel good about taking me to, so it wasn't like a big neighborhood like in a city. So Sunset Gap, which my mom always had a lot to do with, had a big Halloween celebration every year, and it was neat. They would have a costume judging contest, and they would have games. It was family friendly, you know, and you know, not scary, but they had a hayride sometimes and stuff like that. I really enjoyed those Halloween celebrations. I remember those fondly, going to those year after year. I think the last time I went was the fall of maybe my 8th grade year, you know, before I got too old to do that. I can remember me and my cousin had like a kind of matching costumes and going to that. That was a lot of fun. They had dances. They had country dances where they had bands that played and dancing and things like that. I remember going to those. And then Christmas dinners around Christmas. I can remember going to those, and the center was always decorated so nice and everything. Another thing that I did there at the community center, which was year-round, was Boy Scouts. I didn't go as far into, my dad, Duran, was an Eagle Scout, and his scouting was centered around the community center as well. I didn't go as far because as I got older, I got more involved in sports. But I did Cub Scouts and a little bit of Boy Scouts there at the community center. Used to love going to just sit in the library and read. They had the library upstairs, and I always liked to read. I still do, and I would go up there and sit for hours and find a new book and read some if I didn't have anything else to do. Also, for a while, when I was, I guess probably like in middle school age, I think maybe 5th, 6th, 7th grade, around then, maybe in 8th grade. I think I did 3 or 4 years. My Aunt Karen Gloffenheim, I used to go do karate lessons with her. One fall, we actually had a kind of a karate weekend up there. So the class that we did, they used the old dormitory up there, and we had a kind of a getaway where we ran and we worked for 2 days. Got to sleep up there at the old dorm, and I can remember that. It was kind of, if I remember it correctly, it was kind of in the fall of the year, so it was kind of cool out. But I slept right next to the chimney there in the old dorm, and you know, everybody had always said that old dorm was haunted, and I was still in middle school, so I was kind of worried about that. You know, I thought I might see a ghost. I might not sleep well. But I think after I had been doing my karate lessons and activities all day, and been outside, all that fresh air, I was wore out. And so I got into my bed there beside the chimney, and it was nice and warm. And I don't think I'd ever slept so good in my life. So no ghosts, just great sleep. And so many good memories from my time there, and all those activities that I got to do. Really, like I said, it was really special because the community center, everybody there, the directors and my grandmother and my mother, everybody that had anything to do with it, and those work camp groups that came in from different places, they worked so hard to make sure that kids had good, fun, safe things to do year round. And I was really blessed to get to be a part of that. I think the way that I got to grow up was really special. I think, you know, it was definitely more similar to how my dad grew up, and the same thing, you know, and it's before the advent. You know, we didn't have cable TV, we didn't have cell phones, internet until later on, and so it was nice to have things to do and get to go do that. And of course, a lot of it was had to do with church, religious celebrations, and like I said, it was always family friendly, and it was a place that you knew you were safe, but you also had a great time. And I really look back and remember that time in my childhood very fondly.
referring to the bell tower on top of the Sunset Gap School. My father and his brothers, how many I don't know, or maybe community people, took an ox and a wagon down the old dirt muddy road to Juniper and got the bell tower that I think the school was torn down or burned, I don't know which. And it took them days, a day or two, to come back through the muddy place with all, as heavy as it was on the cart they were pulling with the ox to get through all the mud and the curves and the hills. It was very difficult, but they finally got it and cleaned it up, painted it, and put it on top of Sunset Gap. And it came from the Juniper School in Wilhite, as far as I know. And I don't know where Juniper School was. That was torn down before my time. When they converted the kitchen to upstairs, they moved a cabinet that my dad had built, and it's still in that. I don't know who helped him build it. Now someone else helped, and I don't know who it was. But my dad constructed that cabinet, and they put it upstairs in the kitchen now. Because I was there a few years ago, and it's still sitting there. When you come in the door from outside, it's on the left side, the big cabinet.
The Hurricane Helene, we never got too involved in that because we was far enough away from it till it didn't have too much effect on us. So we just went ahead with our normal routine. A lot of people talked about it, but we didn't have no whole lot to talk about because it didn't affect us that much. And that's about the way that went. There was a lot of people, we helped a lot of people that was in the flood, in the flood hurricane. There was a lot of people come here with nothing but automobiles. That's all they had. We gave them food and water, and first one thing and another. But other than that, we didn't have no direct contact with flood victims.
Hey, it's Dan again. One of the things that was wonderful at growing up in Cosby was being able to participate in the football program from Pee Wee to midget, and also the Little League baseball program. My dad helped start these programs for our community, and we spent lots and lots of Saturdays playing those sports. At Sunset Gap, we had a baseball team, and when I was 11, I got to join the Little League team, and I got to be first base, so that was fun. Duran Williams, one of our neighbors, he was maybe 3 years older, he was our catcher, and we would have batting practice, and the coach would be hitting the balls to us, and we would have to catch it, tag the bag, and then throw it back home. And then once we threw it home, the catcher would throw it back at us at first base where I was. And I forgot that part. So the coach hit the ball, and I caught it at first, touched first base, threw it back to Duran. And then I looked away towards the pitcher, and the next thing I heard, the ball whiz right by my head. It just not too far away. And Duran could have just knocked me out probably, but I got lucky and lived to keep playing. But baseball was fun. There were 4 teams, I guess, in our community that played every Saturday. There was Smoky Mountain, which is always the champs. They never lost a game. Then there was Sunset Gap, and we had a pretty good team. And then Jones Cove in Sevier County had a really good team. And English Creek had a team, and then Bogart had a team for a couple, 2 or 3 years. And a lot of the boys didn't have a lot to do in the summertime, so baseball was our saving grace, and all. But in the pecking order, it was always Smoky Mountain that always won every game, and then English Creek and and Jones Cove and Sunset Gap would just split all the time, and Bogard was pretty good too and stuff. So we had a lot of fun. My very last year, we had an all-star game. We always had an all-star game on July the 4th with big events at Sunset Gap and potluck suppers and fireworks and things like that. So we'd have our game, and we finally beat Smoky Mountain, but they were at a disadvantage because their pitcher, who was a good friend, had been fishing with his family, and he had gotten into a bunch of poison ivy, and he like the rest of us used to put sticks in our mouths and whittle and stuff like that, but evidently he got some poison ivy in his mouth and his hands and all that, and he still tried to pitch with all that on him, and it just wasn't the same. And luckily for us, we finally had his number and we beat him that 4th of July, my last year. So that was pretty awesome. But Little League sports, baseball, was a lot of fun in the Cosby community. We had football, and I guess we started that I was probably the 3rd grade. And I think we started with Pee-wee and midgets, and then we got the grass cutters maybe the next year or so. But we played about 4 years of that. In the first year, we never scored a point, and we just learned the basics of the game. And the second year, we scored 1 touchdown, which is wonderful. And then our 3rd year, we got better, and then our last year, we won the championship. So that was pretty cool. But all the guys worked together every year, and we got better and better. And one of the fellas that was on our Cosby football team ended up being a middle linebacker for the University of Tennessee until he got hurt, and then he had to retire from football. But it was fun to see those guys make those friendships and have those wonderful memories. Easter was always a special time at Sunset Gap. Dad was a minister, so we would always have a great program at church. And then after church, we would have games and activities. And one of those activities was a raw egg toss. And as a youngster, probably, 12 or 13 or 14, we had pretty good luck with that against the adults. And it took me forever to figure out why we could beat those guys. And then once I became an adult, I realized the disadvantage that they had. So as a boy, we didn't have any rings on, and so we could catch the eggs, and our hands would be soft. But when the adults would try to catch the eggs, they would have their wedding bands on, and the egg would hit the wedding band, and it would break. And so we were fortunate as kids to not have that, but the adults were fortunate that they had their partners. So Easter was wonderful, and the raw egg toss will always be a great memory and for me. So growing up at Sunset Gap, each summer we would have different youth groups, church youth groups, come in and spend a week at a time, and they would either do community service projects or Bible schools or community days or something like that. But they would come and they would do their activities, and then they would have their meals at Sunset Gap, and sometimes Miss Betty would prepare their suppers, and I would get to eat with them and get to meet those guys. And we always had wonderful times playing volleyball and things outside. But my 2 older sisters would spend an awful lot of time with them, and I never really understood why until I was maybe an 8th or 9th grader. And then I realized that they had some really neat kids, and I took the time to really get to know them. And so I was very, very fortunate to get to know kids from Chicago and Texas and Ohio, and just make a lot of pen pals. you know, and get to communicate with kids from all over the country that were doing things that I never knew about, you know. I went to visit one friend, and they were watching MTV, and I'd never seen MTV before. Because at Cosby, or at Sunset Gap, we had 1.5 channels. We had channel 6, and then half of 10. You know, that was kind of fuzzy. But, so TV wasn't a big thing other than Walt Disney on Sundays or Wild Kingdom. We were pretty much outside riding bikes or playing baseball or playing in the creek or climbing trees or hiking or doing something else, visiting friends, stuff like that. But it was a good way. Probably one of the best ways to grow up.
Since Hurricane Helene, a lot of groups, mostly from out of state, have come down to stay at Sunset Gap and then go out in the community to help people who have had their houses damaged. And one of the groups that came down is Mennonite Disaster Service. And some of the people who came with MDS are the Amish. At the time of this recording, they're still at Sunset Gap right now. And since the Amish don't drive automobiles, they have to have people to drive them around. And on this particular day, I went with my brother to pick them up from the work site back to Sunset Gap. After we got everybody loaded in the vehicle, my brother was driving, I was riding shotgun. There were 3 boys, 3 girls, and then 3 more girls in this van. They were probably of late teenage years, early adult years. And we discovered that the Amish speak a language other than just English. They speak Pennsylvania Dutch. To me, it sounds like a cross between German and English. And of course, the girls, they were in the back, they were saying things, and we noticed they would giggle and laugh to some of those things. So about halfway down Beauregard Road, I just decided that the next time they start laughing, I'll just laugh with them. Now, I had no idea what they were saying at all, but that didn't stop me from joining them in the laughter. And I think they knew exactly what I was going to do. I think everyone knew what I was doing. And I was talking about songs with the boys that were up there, and I would ask them if they knew the hymn "Morning Has Broken." They didn't know it. So I whistled the first verse to them, and everyone in the back, they got quiet. They were just listening. It was very obvious that when I stopped whistling, they would start talking again, but when I would whistle another song, they would get quiet. So I decided I would have a little fun. I don't know how well this will be known to certain audiences either right now or 50 years from now, but there is a song called "Never Gonna Give You Up" by Rick Astley, and for quite a while now it has been well known on the internet for you play this song when you have tricked somebody, known as rickrolling somebody. For example, you have a internet link and you say, "Hey, this is probably the best thing I've ever seen. This is how you could do this." They click on it and it's that song. Because the chorus of the song has lines like, "Never going to give you up, never going to let you down," etc. So the song is used in irony. So I decided I would whistle the chorus of the song. I went, and of course, it did not take my brother very long at all to realize what I was doing. They're like, "What's going on?" I just said, "It's an internet joke." I don't think they ever realized what I was doing, but I have successfully rickrolled the Amish.
So a few years back, my 3 sons were helping me to build some displays to put in a display cabinet in the foyer at Sunset Gap. And as a part of that process, we did a lot of work on the history of Sunset Gap, and we identified some very important ministry outreaches for the center over the years. And I believe we did one on gardening, because the fathers of the students would plant gardens and the mothers of the student would can the food so that the kids would have something to eat when they came to school. So we did a gardening display, we did a display about the baseball team, we did a display about the Boy Scouts, about the quilting, about the weaving, and as part of that, we realized what a rich history Sunset Gap has of reaching out into the community, and part of that was the holiday celebrations. They did a big gathering at Christmas. We had a special service at Easter. I remember the Reverend Robert Davis, Bob Davis, he would always get palm branches, live palm branches, for us to have for our Easter celebration. There was egg hunts, there were a big July 4th celebration. So the holidays at Sunset Gap were very special. And I remember one Easter celebration. They would have an egg hunt. They would have races, like sack races and three-legged races and games and egg tossing. And one of the highlights for me was the egg pecking contest. And I remember this one particular year, we were in elementary school, and Bob and Kay Davis had 3 children. They had Chrissy Davis, Becky Davis, and Danny Davis. And Danny Davis was my age. We were classmates at school. And this particular year, I wanted to enter the egg pecking contest. Now at that time there were no rules or restrictions. You just picked an egg that you had hard boiled and colored and you used it in the contest. And that spring my dad had found a guinea's nest that our neighbor's guineas had stolen away in our pasture. He brought the eggs to the house, and that was part of the ones that Mom had boiled for us to take with us, because at that time each child had to take like 6 eggs and turn them in, and that's the ones that were hidden and were hunted. So I picked one of those guinea eggs that was boiled and colored to use for my egg pecking egg. And I had beaten everybody that I had come up against. And what you did, you took your egg and you took your opponent's egg and you snapped them together, and whoever's eggshell broke was the loser, and whoever's shell didn't break was the winner, and they moved on. So I had made it through the contest where it was just me and Danny Davis. So I took my little guinea egg and I snapped it against Danny's egg, and his shell broke and he lost, and I was the egg pecking champion. And while I celebrated, Danny cried. And so apparently a guinea egg is quite a bit tougher than a regular hen egg, because they're more like, they live out in the fields, they hide their eggs away, they don't go and lay them in a hen house like the chickens do. So the eggshells were a lot tougher than I realized. And so the next year when it came time for the Easter celebration and the egg pecking contest, there was a new rule, no guinea eggs. So I was able to celebrate and savor that victory for just 1 year, and then after that, back to the hen eggs again. But it was a good memory and it was a good time. And one thing I really wanted to share with you today is how proud I am of my mom. She has always been such a hard worker. She would get up early, go to Sunset Gap, cook breakfast of work camp groups, and then lunch, and then supper, and then go shopping afterward for the groceries for the next day. At the same time, she was still the thrift shop coordinator, where she would have to get the thrift shop ready for the weekly sale. Eventually it was bi-weekly, but she just worked so hard. And most of her hard work with the work camp groups, where she would have to cook the 3 meals a day, was during the summer when our garden was coming in. And I remember many nights where she would come home from that long day of work at Sunset Gap, and then she would can till midnight, and then not get much sleep before she had to get up and do it all again the next day. And we didn't have air conditioning in the house. I remember her Dad would hook up a fan in the window and blow it in on her, but I know she was so hot and she worked so hard, and I so appreciate the good model that she was for us. She taught us all how to work very hard and how to be a blessing to other people, and she's always been that for us.
growing up, Cosby was known for its International Ramp Festival. And it was the same weekend as Derby Festival, which was, I think, the first weekend in May. Daddy's Boy Scouts would go out and pick the ramps, and Mama's Girl Scouts would wash the ramps and put them in bags, the tall bags, because it looks like a large onion with 2 or 3 green shoots, and then a large, could be that big a ball, could be that big a ball, of the onion itself. Very, very potent. But the Girl Scouts would have an assembly line in our front yard at Sunset Gap. There would be a washing tub, a rinsing tub, and then a tub that would get any other remainder of dirt or debris, make sure that they were clean enough to eat. And then somebody would have a knife and they would cut the end of the bulb off where the roots were and make sure that it still had the onion shoots up. So what we ended up with was a ramp about this long with a ball at the end, and we stuffed them down in a plastic bag, just a thin plastic bag, probably about like that. And there may be 3 to 5 ramps in a bag. And at the Ramp Festival, those could be sold. So after the Ramp Festival, Cosby was notoriously known for kids bringing ramps to school, and if they were caught with them, they got sent back home because the ramps had a aroma or odor, or whichever you want to use, whichever term you want to use there, but it was very, very potent. And so I can remember kids having to go back home because they had eaten ramps before they got on the bus in the morning, and it just wasn't allowed. It was like chewing gum, or it was like chewing tobacco or something like that back in the day. So that's just a odd story, not funny or whatever, but a good memory of how the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts worked together to help the International Ramp Festival on Kena Vista Hill. So Dad, as the director of Sunset Gap Community Center, was instrumental in inviting the students, the ecumenical students from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, to come for a 1 or 2 week visit each year and stay at Sunset Gap. And they stayed in the dorm area or the craft house. They ate their meals down in the community center kitchen, and during the day they would be dispersed into the local elementary schools or the high schools. So we had them going into Jones Cove School, Jones Cove Elementary, Cosby Elementary, and through high school, Newport Grammar School, and the high school there. I think they may have gone to Centerview and Edgemont also. They came every year. Different students would come every year, and as they would talk about their homelands and take questions from the elementary, middle school, and high school students, it would open up a brand new whole world for the students. But once a year, when they were here, there would be one night designated for International Food Night, and each of the students would make their homeland foods, and then we would open it up to the community to come and join in that potluck, and the community would be able to interact with the international students also.
One Sunday afternoon when the thrift shop was closed, well, the whole center was closed, somebody called and told me that somebody was in the thrift shop. It wasn't supposed to be. We drove up there, and this young fellow was in there, and he was loading up all the clothing and stuff that he wanted. And when I wanted to make him leave, he pushed my sister down, and when he did, I picked up a child's little lunchbox and kept beating him, hit him till he went on out the door. And the lady that's with him said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Well, I'll give you some of it too." And so they both ran out the door. They didn't carry anything with them either. Once we were in the thrift shop and this lady was smoking, and we told her, said, "You can't smoke in here." And Tootie passed this little dish over to her so that she could put her cigarette out, and she pushed it out on Tootie's hand. And when she did, I grabbed up my 2-liter Diet Coke bottle and whapped her a time or two, and me and Tootie both did. And Tootie told her she'd have to leave and couldn't come back.
So the work camp groups, again, as I mentioned earlier, it was a really fun time to meet people from different parts of the country, and it was late 60s and all through the 70s, and work camp groups come in. Another interesting thing that Reverend Davis and Kay did was they would get foreign international students to come in from the University of Michigan. And I think they usually come about May or early April, probably, early April, because they were still in college probably. And they'd be as high as 12 or 15 of them. They'd come and stay in the craft house, but on like a Thursday night of the week they were there, they had been visiting elementary schools, Jones Cove, Smoky Mountain, Cosby, Hartford. They'd visited those schools and spoke. But Bob would ask members of the community to host 3 or 4 of them for an evening Southern meal. So I know Don and Glenda Williamson hosted, Tuck and Margie Templin, us, Harold and Betty Jean Williamson. So that's 4 or 5 families that he would call upon to host them. And I remember, I believe it was 77 or 78, got an interesting take. We had a student that we hosted there from Israel, and we had a student from Iran. And that was right before the Iranian revolt in 79 that they took over our embassy. And it was uncomfortable for them. So I don't know whatever happened to either one of those 2 young gentlemen. But I just think back on that, and that was just a year or so before that revolt in Iran, and you could tell that there was friction between them that night at our house. And Mama, she cooked usually a big fried chicken meal with mashed potatoes, peas, homemade milk gravy, homemade biscuits, and she'd make some kind of cobbler, peach or blackberry, whatever she had canned or frozen. And it was just a neat time to do that. Now, we would go out with the work camp group, or the staff, I call them, the permanent staff. They had swimming lessons every quick as school was out in June. You'd go to the city park, they gave free swimming lessons from like 9 in the morning to 12 each day. And that last day we'd stop somewhere and get a snack. And so that was good to go learn how to swim. They would take us to the Cosby Park, hike a nature trail. They'd pack a bag lunch, a little sandwich, an apple, and some cookies or chips or something. So we got to go do that. So those are the biggest things that we went with them. Every Thursday afternoon, Mama would cook for the work camp groups, and she'd cook them a picnic lunch. Again, it was fried chicken, but she'd make potato salad, homemade biscuits, and a pie or a cake or something, cakes for them to take. And they'd go out to the sinks on Little River, and they'd tube and swim and have their picnic lunch. So it was always neat to get to meet. It's just fascinating. You know, again, it was during the late 60s and all through the 70s, so I call it nothing else but the hippie era was going on. So I told you that Reverend Davis would have the staff that were permanent there during the summers and for the year, cut their hair and shave their beard. Because some of those people would come in, you know, they were late high school or early college, and they had long hair, beards, you know, speaking as you would think back watching some of the movies and stuff, some of the terms they use that I was unfamiliar with, I just thought was fascinating, you know, like, hey dude, hey man, what's up, chill out, cool it down man, things like that, you know, and of course we had to do that with each other as peoples around here. We had to try to talk like that for a week or two. It's kind of funny to do. So one time, there was a group, I forget what state they were from. Michigan rings a bell, but I'm not sure. And or Ohio. And they wanted me to take them fishing. So I went fishing. We went down to Douglas Lake and fished Pigeon River. And we caught a few fish. During the conversation, I was probably 11 or 12. I'd tell them about raising tobacco. And they wanted to know about tobacco. And I said, well, we top the tobacco and then you got to sucker it. And they said, you top the tobacco? I said, yeah. He said, what do you do with the tobacco? Tops. I said, we just throw them on the ground. They said, can you dry them and smoke them? I said, well, I guess you could, but most of the time, you know, they cure the leaves out and then they make cigars out of them. So that was about the time we were topping tobacco. So I saved a bag full and took to them. I don't know what they done with them. I think they had an ulterior motive, thinking it's something more like pot or marijuana. But I took those tobacco tops to them, the flowers. I don't know. That just stuck in my head all of a sudden. I remembered that they wanted to dry those tobacco tops and smoke them. Always interesting to look back on the holidays that you had at Sunset Gap. You know, we always had a big Christmas program, and Santa was there, and gave away gifts to all the kids. Everybody got a big stocking filled with apples and oranges and candies and nuts, and that was neat. And Easter, every family that come to Sunday school, Bob and Kay had purchased the white peace lilies, and every family got one. And they'd have sunrise service. And Palm Sunday, the week before, Bob would go out and buy palm fronds. I guess they come from South Carolina or Georgia, and everybody got one or two. Every person got one. You could wave them. So those are neat. But the 4th of July was always a big deal. We'd have an all-star game in baseball. The All-Stars would play the #1 team at the time, and so that was big. I remember Grandpa Walt, or Uncle Walt, he would referee, he'd umpire the bases. He's out there in a long sleeve shirt and that big felt hat, and he'd give the 2 thumbs if somebody was out, or he'd go safe. And you know, he was late 70s, getting close to 80 then, I guess, 80. But a big dinner on the grounds, big pot. Everybody was bringing a potluck dish, and then the center provided ham and stuff like that, and drinks. And everybody was to bring a dessert, a side dish, and an entree. And it was the best food. Had all kind of old-fashioned entertainment. They'd have some people there that night before we did the fireworks, and usually call a square dance and go in there and do the Virginia reel and some of those. And they'd hoot and holler and clap and have a big time. And it was really neat to do the dances. And they had one for younger people, teenagers and kids, and they had one for adults. It was pretty neat, the people that could dance. They'd usually have some people around that could play bluegrass. They'd have a fiddle and a banjo and a guitar, and they'd play some of that music. But the fireworks was the crowning thing. Just this huge fireworks display. People would sit along the bank all around there where they could see good. And some people that were older would sit in a car. And but we had old-fashioned entertainment. They had the 2-man pie eating contest and the 6-man pie eating contest. And you had your team, and they had those cream pies sliced up that had been in the freezer. And whoever got theirs to eat first and all in their mouth, they were the winner, and they'd win some prizes. You had sack races, the old sacks, 3-legged race. They'd tie your leg together. People would be following. Wheelbarrow race. They'd have a dash. You had to run down and touch a pole down there at the edge of the field next to Vernal and Thelma's and run back. And then they'd blindfold you and put you back to back, and you had to walk sideways until you heard the whistle. When the whistle, you had to stop where you were and come back. So whoever had went the farthest was at that time blindfolded without losing contact. If you lost contact, you had to stop and get back in contact. So that was neat. A couple times they had the balloon thing where they threw a balloon toss. You know, if you hit the end of your fingers, it would pop. It was filled with water. And they did an egg toss. They usually did that at Easter, but they'd do it then too. And a lot of times the young people would win and everything. And it was interesting to see who got the egg splashed all over them. remember Mama one time. They was pretty far apart. Her and it may have been Aunt Mary Helen or Aunt Vivian, but the egg busted on Mama. They went all over. So those are some really good memories of the 4th of July. And they would always talk about what 4th of July meant. Of course, we learned it in Boy Scouts about how our nation began and got the independence from Great Britain. So just really an all day. Just started about 11 o'clock and had lunch, dinner on the ground that evening, and all kind of events and singing, and it was just a day of entertainment. And it's amazing the crowds that were there. There were really a lot of people would show up. It was a focal point of both communities in Sevier and Cott County, and people from outlying areas sometimes would come also. But that was a good memory. Something that wasn't a holiday that was interesting to talk about though was Sunday school. Like I said, we didn't have church service, but we had Sunday school. And Mary Webb, her maiden name was Bradshaw. I went to school. She had 2 boys and 2 girls. And Barbara was in my class, and Jeff was older, and Judy was older, and Bobby Lee was younger. But she played the piano, beautiful, beautiful piano player. So we'd sing probably about 20, 25 minutes. Then they'd do announcements, and Daddy taught adult Sunday school. Bob and Kay would teach a class of, like teens and then little kids. Bob taught the teens, and Kay taught the little kids. And so that was it. It was a little over an hour with the singing and Sunday school, for about an hour and 15 minutes. We'd take up an offering. And the Sunday school room had moved from the big auditorium into that room off the stage. And what precipitated part of the remodeling was somebody, and I know who it was, had climbed up on the roof and dropped a couple sticks of dynamite down in one of those big chimneys and blew it out and blew part of the wall. So they had to remodel. And what it was over a protest, because the first African-American citizen that had ever been to the center came there in probably about 68. And that's what it was about. And but that's how that happened, and they remodeled and moved the Sunday school room, and nothing was ever done about it. And that person later on repented and felt bad about doing it. This late teenager would have done it. But so that's how that rearranged. Now, when I was little, the kitchen was downstairs, where the back part of the thrift shop is now, and that's where it was. And the thrift shop, as far as I know, has always been around. That area between where the old kitchen was and the thrift shop is, it was an open area with a wall and a door, but it was pretty much open. And it was the tool room. They had all kind of tools and garden tools you could work. And speaking of gardening, in several summers, the work camp group and Bob and community people would have a community garden there. They raised tomatoes, squash, zucchini, potatoes, green beans. So you could come and pick, but you're supposed to work in it some too. And they did that for, I remember, 4 or 5 years. They had that community garden right there below where my Uncle Warren lived. Him and Aunt Horace lived there right past there was a playground out where the parking lot is now, a little kid's playground. And it was really neat. And, we, moving on down to that ball field, there were picnic tables down there, and there's a little branch runs down through there. We used to go there and catch crawdads. We'd catch spring lizards, turn them loose. So it was just a lot of stuff to do around there, even if it wasn't anything organized. You could go out and run and play, and there's always a badminton set that you could get down there and hit the birdies around. And there were hula hoops. Of course, that was big. You could take a hula hoop, so you could hula hoop the longest. But you could just, it was a library there. It had a lot of good little kids' books and adult books. So you could check out a book, and you'd go lay out down in the grass in the shade, and we used to do that some. We'd lay there and read and watch the clouds. It's just amazing what we did to occupy our time. It's fun now that I kind of wonder if kids growing up today miss out a lot by not being able to do those things. And we got to play unsupervised most of the time, unless it was Bible school or day camp. That's another thing that the work camp groups and the staff would do. They'd have at least about 6 to 7 weeks of day camp. Right after Vacation Bible School was over in the second week of June, and you'd have 2 weeks in in June, 4 in July, and one or two in August, because we didn't go back to school till after Labor Day. We didn't go back, start about last day of August or early September when we went back to school. So we got to have day camp a week or two in August, and all four. So you go up there, and it was like 9 to 3. You got a morning snack, afternoon snack, and some sort of little lunch, and did all kind of activities. You collected leaves. We went out and identified different animals or birds you saw. We'd do different things like that. Do all kind of crafts, making something all the time. So you learned leadership, you learned fellowship, you learned how to get along in a group. The staff was really good in the work camps about conflict resolution, solving problems with us, trying to get us to see where we might have made a mistake and then what you might do differently next time. And when I got to be a principal, I tried that some. I got to learn to get the two parties disagreeing down, and finally they'd say, yeah, I made a mistake. Well, if you're faced with that situation again, what would you do differently? And what do you need to do now? So I learned a lot of those things as a kid from other people that helped me as a professional later on.
Well, as I mentioned, 2 weeks of my summer would be spent there at Sunset Gap, in particular with Vacation Bible School and day camp was what they call it. And so really the only difference was, the day camp was kind of non-religious, and Vacation Bible School had to do with, we studied scriptures and talked about the Lord and sang a lot of songs. With both, they did crafts. I loved the craft time. Craft times was very neat, and it might have been you building a house out of popsicle sticks. But of course I loved the food for both. They had things kids loved, like spaghetti or little ham sandwiches. Seems like they always had the little sandwich cookies. Kool-Aid. Kool-Aid was the drink of choice. They would make big pitchers or even, a big gallon thing of Kool-Aid, red Kool-Aid. After lunch, every kid would have a Kool-Aid mustache, a red mustache where we had Kool-Aid. I loved, lunchtime there at Vacation Bible School and day camp. I still remember, several of the songs we sang. I'm not much of a singer, but I still remember some of those that we sang and things like that. And so with both, it was great. Of course, we would go outside and play games, usually maybe right before lunch. You'd go out and play games because it would be during the summer. So before it would get hot, they would go out and play games. That way you could come back in and cool off for lunch. And then a lot of times you might have something indoors to do, after lunch or craft time or something like that. But couldn't remember some of those same work camp people coming back year after year. Names, I'm getting older now, but names have faded in my mind's eye a little bit. But I really, those 2 weeks were something I really looked forward to. And usually I would have a couple of my friends or a couple of my cousins who also lived in the area that I spent a lot of time with and went to school with, and they would be there at day camp or Vacation Bible School as well. And so it was a time we get to spend time all day together and have fun. And if we went out to play games, then obviously, if we were going to go out and play a wiffle ball or kickball, then we were buddies, so we were going to try to team up and dominate the game. We wanted to win. We were very competitive, sports oriented, me and my cousins, and so we would usually win with those things like that. But just really enjoyed those 2 weeks because it was as I talked about, I spent a lot of time up there, and a lot of that time was free play. Back in the 80s and early 90s, probably something that I wouldn't have let my kids do at that age, but that was kind of how things were back then. I was allowed to roam around, and nobody was really going to look for me. They assumed I was okay, and I probably was, And so, but that was nice those 2 weeks because it was structured. There was activities. There was things to do, and of course there was more people around too. A lot of times when I spent time up there, it would just be me. So I loved having the other kids around during Vacation Bible School or during day camp. It was nice when other people were there. I had people to talk to and things like that. So really liked those two weeks of the summer every year. So one of my favorite events every year, of course, was the Easter egg hunt. You know, Easter was a great time, and of course it is a great time. You know, we get to celebrate the rebirth of our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, when I was little, though, I enjoyed all of the candy and the games and the things like that. And of course, where we always went was Sunset Gap. We you know, the Saturday, they always had their egg hunt, almost always on the Saturday before Easter. So it was just a great weekend. We might spend Friday night, usually at my grandmother's house, dyeing eggs. We would dye eggs, and then we would go to the egg hunt on Saturday, which was a big to-do. You got to hunt the eggs, and of course it was always a competition. I think I've mentioned a couple of times my cousin Scott, who was my cousin and one of my very best friends that grew up together, and we're still friends today. You know, we would be in competition to see who could get more eggs or who could get the prize egg. They would always have a big plastic egg that might have, you know, a dollar bill in it or something special like that. And you'd have, but now we were competitors in the egg hunt, and we were partners in the other events. So they had a raw egg toss every year. And, you know, what you would do is you'd start pretty close together, you know, maybe 3 or 4 feet apart. And you had a raw egg, and you'd toss it to your partner. Now, one line would stay in place. And the other line, after every toss, a successful toss, then that line had to take a step back. And so the idea was, you know, whoever was the farthest apart, and their egg stayed intact. Well, you get pretty far apart. You know, you might get 15, 20 yards apart, and that's a long way to throw a raw egg. And it was always hilarious because, you know, some people's coordination was not as good as others. They might wind up catching that raw egg on their face or their chest. So, you know, there were oohs and ahs and big bursts of laughter with the raw egg toss. But it was always, we won. We won quite a bit. Of course, I played, you know, sports, and so did my cousin, and we were both pretty coordinated. And you know, there was a trick to it. You know, you had to really cup your hands and cushion the blow of the egg, as you called it, tuck it away. You had to have soft hands. And so we won it quite often. So we would, like I said, we'd be competitors in the egg hunt, and then we would be partners in the egg toss. And a lot of times too, they had a 3-legged race. And if you know the 3-legged race, you tie your inside legs together, and we took pride in trying to win that thing too. So we were very competitive, and we wanted to win those other events. But there would be, you know, good food and candy and games. I mean, that's good stuff kids like, right? And you get to see your buddies, and oh, it was so much fun. And then, you know, Sunday morning you went to church and celebrated what Easter's really about. But growing up, loved Easter weekend, and of course that revolved around, you know, Jesus and our family and the good times we had at Sunset Gap, which, you know, was so, I'm thankful today for those, the adults, some of which were family and some of which, you know, worked at the center, and other volunteers in the community. So thankful for all those people that put on those events and gave me such great childhood memories.
Miss Plummer and Miss Aiken and Miss Cochran as well taught us some art if you wanted it. And I was very interested in art and painting and drawing. And she had a contest, Thanksgiving, for someone to draw the first Thanksgiving with the Pilgrims, and they're outside cooking their food. And she told me what she wanted in the picture, a pot like you cook in outside, and the Pilgrim people in their hats and aprons and so forth, and she wanted one child in it, and I drew that picture with her help, and I won the prize. And I don't remember what the prize was, but she had a little prize of some kind, and I won that prize. And later she secured me a scholarship at Chapel Hill so I could pursue my artwork. And I don't know what happened to the drawing. I never took it home. It was on the wall for a long time out in the hallway by the auditorium, and I don't know what happened to it. I never asked her because it didn't go back.
Me and my wife brought my grandson up here. He played baseball with the Great Smoky League back that would have been in the 90s, early 90s. And we played baseball down here in the baseball field. That's been quite a few years ago. And he is 30 now. So that's about it.
My mom and dad ended up getting a satellite dish the year I went away to college, and so when I came back, they had this dish that was probably 12 feet wide, you know, a great big thing, and they could watch lots and lots of different kinds of channels. And so I used to love to go back home and check that out on spring breaks and fall breaks and winter breaks and things like that. But Sunset Gap was wonderful. You know, we got to meet a lot of great people, and had lots of animals, a lot of dogs. The earliest that I can remember was probably Zip and Dude. They were two beagles, or bird dogs. And then we had Red, that was kind of a Heinz 57. And then Pee-wee and Ralph and Skipper. And then later, as we got older, Mom had Alice, a little peekapoo, and then we had Rascal. My middle sister brought Rascal home from Berea College one break, and he ended up just staying with us. So that was kind of neat. But I had a couple cats. We had two Siamese kittens that used to just go crazy around the house in the middle of the night. And one night, they were running in the kitchen, and they hit the spice rack above the oven, and when it fell, it turned on one of the eyes. So my mom and dad woke up to smoking spices, and the next day the cats were gone, you know, so couldn't take a chance on that anymore. But animals were really special out in the community in Sunset Gap. Some of the guys had motorcycles. I didn't get to do that. I just had my bike. Every time I seemed to get on a mini bike or a motorcycle, I would end up getting stitches. So Mom and Dad were pretty smart, and they said, not on our watch, you know, I suppose. So it was bicycles for me until we got to drive at 16, and then got to drive to baseball practice, and so I got to drive to school from then on. So that was good. But it opened up the world, my community a little bit bigger and stuff, so that was pretty nice.
I would like to thank everybody for watching this video. It means a lot to me that people like my content and the history of Sunset Gap. For a while now, I've been printing these cards, giving them to people so they could watch this content, but YouTube allows you to see how many views you get in a week, a month, etc. And I've noticed that maybe 1 out of every 10 cards that I give people to, that does anybody even watch them. So if you have watched this video or any of my other videos from scanning that card, thank you very much. It means a lot to me. I would like to continue to make videos like this for many, many years, although I do not know how many on-camera appearances I'm going to make from now, but I would like to make these videos long enough so somewhere someone could be watching this decades from now and go, wow, look how young he is there. I'm 22, by the way.
So some of our favorite Sunset Gap memories are around weddings, family weddings. And the first one that I can remember specifically was in 1981. It was in the winter, and my brother Duran, who is the oldest in the family, had gone to Maryville College. He met a nice young lady from Pennsylvania named Melissa Cannon, and her father was a Presbyterian minister up in Pennsylvania. So they decided to get married in Pennsylvania. We did not have a vehicle that would make it to Pennsylvania. We didn't even know how to start going to Pennsylvania. So Bob Davis from Sunset Gap loaded us all up in a van, and he drove us all up there. And as part of the wedding, there were co-ministers. So Melissa's father, Bob Cannon, was co-minister, and Bob Davis was co-minister. And so that was the first very special wedding memory from Sunset Gap. And also my older sister Joni, she and her husband Steve got married at Sunset Gap. This would have been in 1991. And they had planned to get married outside on the hill beside the craft house, but it had rained the night before, so they couldn't get married outside. And last minute they shifted everything indoors, and they got married in front of that beautiful big stone fireplace in the foyer. And so that was another very special wedding memory in our family. And the last one was from 2004. My oldest nephew, Tyler Williams, got married to Kimberly Self. We all call her Kimmy. And they actually got married at their family church, which was Pleasant Valley Community Church. But the fellowship hall downstairs wasn't big enough to have the reception, so they had their reception at Sunset Gap. And it was another good family memory concerning weddings in Sunset Gap. As I grow older, I think often about what my vision for the future of Sunset Gap would be. And I would hope that Sunset Gap would continue to be a vital ministry outreach to the community. A lot of what Sunset Gap does right now is really not that well known. There's not a whole lot of fanfare behind what we do. We have a thriving food pantry. We still have the thrift shop open. We still have the work camp groups that come down and minister in the community. So I would hope that we would continue to do that and more. But my greatest hope is that the Williams family, which started Sunset Gap School and the Sunset Gap Community Center, will continue to be a huge part of the ministry and of the ministry's outreach.
Mom was the music director, I guess you would say, of all of Sunset Gap's musical presentations or pageants or events. And so she would sing, she would teach us Christmas songs, and we would sing for parents in the community, or with the Girl Scouts, she would teach us all her Campfire Girl songs that she learned as a kid growing up and brought to the Girl Scouts. But she sang all the time, and even now as I travel, I also sing in the car. We would put on pageants for Christmas, and the one thing I remember about her tutelage or tutorage is that when you sing a word with an S at the end, you drop the S because people will hear it anyway. So, for instance, if there was a song such as Jingle Bells, you wouldn't sing the S on bells. So, jingle bell, jingle all the way. So the S would be dropped. And I can remember there were some songs, and I can't recall what those are now, but they just would sound so funny without the S on it. So like Christmas, instead of Christmas, it was Christmas. And I thought that was just so funny that we would have to sing Christmas instead of Christmas songs. To wrap this whole thing up, one of my favorite memories about Sunset Gap and our time there is when Daddy would take the family with him to do Sunset Gap promotional tours. During this time, we had a lot of fun as a family, but we also sang a lot in the car, and we got our first taste of performing for people outside of the family as far as using our musical instruments. Danny doesn't do that anymore, but Chrissy played her guitar up till she passed a few years ago. She was an international folk dance caller for her profession, and I do workshops for early childhood folk to promote, or I did, to promote the passing down of play party games and traditional songs from Appalachia. My mom and my sister and I formed a group called Dancing Hearts of Appalachia, and the heart of that came from when we traveled with Daddy and Mom. Daddy would promote Sunset Gap Community Center to women's groups or men's groups, church-related groups, or anybody who was interested in Sunset Gap Community Center, Lions Club, Kiwanis Club, Ruatan Club, those types of events. Mom would play the dulcimer, I would play the auto harp, Dan would play bongo drums, and Chrissy would play her guitar. And so, as a family, we grew stronger as we traveled, and it has been a lifelong event. Music ingrained in us that I have continued throughout my early child career, which began at Sunset Gap Community Center in Mom's first preschool. Another long-lasting effect of those trips with Daddy is that work groups from the churches out of Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan still continue to send their young people down to Sunset Gap for work camp group weeks or bi-weeks. So it thrills my heart to know that something that was started back in 1965 continues to grow at Sunset Gap Community Center.
Kay Davis, who passed away earlier this year, meant a lot to me. After my youngest daughter was born, when I woke up from the delivery and everything, Kay Davis was sitting beside my bed. And then we were talking about naming Sharon. David wanted to name her Sharon Gwen, and I said, no, I don't want that. And my mama was just standing there, and she said, why don't you name her Sharon Kay after Kay Davis? That's where we got that. One year at Christmas, the director had to be out of town, and we hadn't delivered all the Christmas presents and things around in the community. And me and Tootie got in the van, and we loaded all the Christmas presents up, and we sung jingle bells and everything. We'd go to all the older people and sing to them and take them presents and socks of candy and stuff, Christmas socks. And Sunset Gap would build a float and for us to march in the Christmas parade. And Duran and John and Karen was all little, and they rode the float, and all the rest of the Sunday school members walked along with the float all the way from one end of Newport to the other one. And we walked up the hill up by Conagra and up to another church up there. We left County High School and walked out. Bob Davis used to push mow the whole property up there with a non-electric lawnmower. It was just a walk behind one, and it would take him a long time, and he worked that hard to keep all that mowed and kept nice.
Community and place. Guy I got my doctorate with, he did his dissertation on place and people's connection to place and community. So the surrounding community at Sunset Gap, by and large, was very supportive of the center and their activities. course, a lot of my family on the Williams and Breeden side, Grandma and Grandpa, they lived there for a long time. And of course, Betty Jane Hicks Williams, my great grandmother, and she gave the initial parcel of land for Sunset Gap. And other pieces were bought in Cocke and Sevier County. And of course, the county line runs through the center, and the steps go down the Sevier County side, the Cocke County side. But the people who lived in the neighborhood were very supportive, by and large, and they had been going back to when Miss Cochran had come in 1919, 1920, and telling the family they was going to close the school in that area. And Betty Jane Hicks Williams kind of rallied the ladies in the community, and they got the center built, and the school continued there. And Miss Cochran was there for quite a while. Daddy had her when he was in school there. Remember, he said Miss Cochran, Miss Plummer, and one other lady. There were three at one time. And Miss Cochran was kind of over the school and taught some classes. But the ladies in the community would can goods, canned tomatoes, canned peaches, canned blackberries, things like that to help feed the kids. So the kids got a nutritious meal as could be provided there during the school day. Daddy told me about that. And he went there in first grade to 8th grade. He had to catch the bus at Sunset Gap to ride it to Cosby High School. He went 6 weeks and quit. This girl wanted to sit with him on the bus. He didn't want to sit with her, so he quit going to school. And then he joined the Navy when he was 22. So he had a big gap there from like 14 to 22 where he just was our Grandma and Grandpa on the farm. But some people in the community, Grandma and Grandpa Williams, Uncle Walt, they didn't have electricity. They had oil lamps, wood cook stoves, no car, and they had a self-sufficient farm. They raised tobacco, and they'd have milk cows and some beef cattle they'd sell. They raised hogs, and they'd butcher them in the cold weather of October, November, smoke the meat. They had a smokehouse. So you're talking about really back in time, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Grandma and Grandpa both passed away in the 70s. To where it's just a total different era. Yet they were very supportive of the center and the activities that went on there. So it was really, really neat to see the people that come in from different communities and different states that were in their teens and 20s interact with like Grandma and Grandpa and Great Uncle Walt and some of my aunts and uncles and Mom and Dad and us. They were fascinated, and a lot of times they wanted to hear us talk. They wanted Mama to say salt and milk because they thought we said it funny. We made salt a long drawn-out word, salt, milk, and we used a lot of words that you'd call, I think, double words. Like we wouldn't say the preacher, we'd say the preacher man. We wouldn't say the widow, we'd say the widow woman. And we wouldn't say the calf, we'd say the baby calf. So it was words like that. And Grandma had part of that old Scotch-Irish in her. She didn't say tomatoes and potatoes. She said mateys and taties. And she said kivers instead of covers. And my daddy talked faster than I do. It's hard to understand Daddy when he got familiar with people and got comfortable. Because Daddy started talking about like this right here, and I was raised over on that hill, and I just told him. Unless you was around Daddy a lot, you couldn't hardly understand what he said. But, the Appalachian people didn't have that slow southern drawl like they have down Georgia and Alabama and South Carolina. We had a lot faster rhythm on our talk. And we talk fast, but we drop the endings off our words. We drop the INGs off. So when people come in on work camp groups or summer staff or just international students, they were just fascinated to hear little kids talk or people that were in their 70s. They wanted to hear us talk. They wanted to hear us tell stories. And part of our culture in that area, Sevier and Cocke County, was storytellers. And they loved to hear my mama tell stories and everything. So it was part of our culture to pass on stories and to relive our culture and that community that was close-knit around the center.
Of course, Sunset Gap was founded originally as a school, and that was the purpose. It was the purpose of why the land was given was for there to be education to continue in the area. At the time, The people there, you know, our family in particular was a very isolated area, and it was a long way to get to schools in Newport or Sevierville. And so it started out as a school there, and of course it was really neat that quite a few years later they started a preschool program, which helped lay the foundation for a lot of people in the area and in our family, our education. Most of us, especially my generation, my younger brothers and sisters, younger cousins, went to preschool there. And of course, the head preschool teacher at the time was Joy Black. Miss Black was a fantastic lady, was great with kids. My mom was the assistant preschool teacher. Later, she took over as the head preschool teacher, and Mom was great with kids, still is today, especially of that age. Loved going to preschool. When I started going to preschool there was right when we moved back to Cosby. You know, we actually lived in a little house just down the hill from Sunset Gap. You could literally walk up the hill. But the preschool bus, they had a route that it ran that picked kids up. Very fond memory for me is we had a big dog, and he didn't start out as our dog. He started out as a neighbor's dog, and they didn't really want him or take care of him. So it was actually my first dog. His name was Bruno. He was part Great Dane. He was a mix, but he was a gigantic dog. Of course, at the time I was in preschool, he seemed like Clifford the Big Red Dog. I mean, he was just gigantic. Now, he was a big dog. I mean, well, easily 100 pounds. You know, great Danish looking. But Bruno was such a good and friendly dog. And so, and he loved me, and so he would escort the bus up the hill to preschool, and then a lot of times when we got out of preschool, he would be waiting. You know, he wanted to see me back and forth to school, and it was a great dog. So I remember that, and I remember so at the time, you know, later on, when the center had preschool, they had when they expanded a little bit, they had preschool in a little outbuilding, kind of in the back parking lot there at the center. But when I went to preschool there, it was upstairs where the kitchen is now. And so I can still remember how that room looked. I can remember how it looked from right when you walked in the door from the main, you know, what you'd call the auditorium. When you walked in from the auditorium through that door, there was it was like a little playhouse right there. You know, like a kid's playhouse. Wasn't very big, obviously, but it had like a little slide coming off of it. Loved to play in the playhouse. Loved to read books, loved to color, and of course it was the start of my education. And I was fortunate enough to do pretty well in school, and I got to go to college later on, and of course now I have my master's degree and an education specialist degree. That's what I do today. I teach school, and I coach football, and I teach school at Gatlinburg Pittman, which of course Gatlinburg is just down the road. But that, as it was intended to be, the preschool program at Sunset Gap was the first part of my formal education and the foundation of what was to come for me. All right, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my memories of how I grew up and all of the great things and remembrances I have about Sunset Gap Community Center. I'll talk to you later.
So that's some of the great memories I have about Sunset Gap. So hope you enjoy listening to them, and thank you.
I did not want to retire from working. I would still have been up at Sunset Gap volunteering if I hadn't have broke my leg. So now I'm just at home, resting most of the time, and I've enjoyed all the years I was up there, but I enjoy being at home too. So I will tell you all goodbye, and I will talk to you later.
And until we meet again, here's a hug from me to you.
Well, so long for now, and y'all be sure and come back now. You hear?
Thanks for watching and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity of sharing a little bit of Sunset Gap and Cosby with you. My dad was a servant, my mom was a servant, and as I grew up, I started working at Tennessee School for the Deaf, and I loved working with special populations in a therapeutic environment. And so I learned a lot of sign language, and learn a lot of ASL now. So if you have an opportunity to meet someone and you can help them, fantastic. It will make a good memory. Thank you for letting me be here today.
Thank you for listening to me, and I hope I done a halfway decent job, and thank you very much.
I guess I finished all the questionnaires and interviews, and the only way I know to sign off is just say I love all of my people. I don't know them because I didn't grow up with them, but I wish I did. And it's not too late if they're watching or hear me to call me anytime. I would love to have them. But the only way to sign off is just say God bless and goodbye.